I believe that the fires we're cast upon are the flames we shall become. I believe in a common calling where our temples pray as one. I believe in the word of wonder and a kingdom for the saved.
Larry Pollock here with Mike Morris, IFBB Pro, and one of the top bodybuilders from the early 2000s. We've got a lot to discuss today. I actually was doing some research before this on Mike, and just to get up to date. And he has a pretty elaborate story, and definitely have some interesting information that I think people are going to find valuable. And I have some for sure questions for you. So I believe it was 99 that you won the USA. Is that correct?
99, I won the overall at the North American.
North American. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. And then you turned pro, and my understanding is before then, you were at a certain level, and then did you move to Venice after you turned pro or before?
Yeah, I turned pro in 99, and then I took about a year off to put on some more size, and I competed as a pro from 2001 through 2005, and I moved out to Venice Beach somewhere around 2002, 2003.
Okay.
Yep.
I was actually right in the middle of competing at that time.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was competing in nationals in USAs. I might have even competed in the same show as you. I was bouncing back and forth from North Americas to nationals, USAs.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to look. I've been going through muscle memory a lot. You ever look at muscle memory? It's a website. It just shows all the placings. So if you punch up muscle memory and you put up like the USA or the nationals or junior nationals, it'll show you all the competitors, how they placed through the entire top 15. And
wow.
It's a pretty neat website that I use a lot, because sometimes I'll reference it back and I'll think I placed in a certain show, or a certain bodybuilder was in that competition with me. And, sometimes you misremember, and it was like, oh, it wasn't the 94 junior nationals, it was the 95 USA. So, but muscle memory is a really great tool for people to use if you want to look up certain bodybuilders and how they placed in certain shows. So
I'll have to check that out. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was competing at that time, and I was also, well, mostly I was training. Let's see. I was training with Scott Mendelson, and a lot of times Gold North Hollywood, but I would go to Gold's Venice during that time.
Yeah, Gold's was
and then I was training with Nasser El Sambadi for the USAs, and I want to say that was 2005. I was driving down to San Diego to the gym. So I must have been competing like right about the time you were competing.
Yeah, it must have been. I remember seeing Nasser in there every once in a while. I heard he went to the World Gym a little more.
It was World Gym back then, and then they changed it to the gym.
Oh, is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, it was World Gym San Diego, and then later they changed the name to the gym.
Oh, okay. Didn't know
it's
that.
Still there. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you're right. It was World Gym.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually met him. I was on a trip to Mexico. I was driving down there to pick up gear, and I stopped there to train. And I was about 6-7 weeks out from the USAs, and he saw me, and he said he thought I could do well, and he wanted to train me for the last 7 weeks. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is Nasser. This is great. Yeah. That was a huge mistake.
Yeah, you should have. I have an interesting Nasser story as well. I've seen him around the circuit and things like that. And I think I've done, at least one show with him, might have been the Night of Champions. But after I retired, soon after I retired, and I think I was still going to some of the shows. I don't know if it was the Olympia or the Arnold, but, I'd retired for health reasons, for kidney reasons. And I remember like he was at a booth and he left the booth and kind of approached me. and was concerned. Obviously, I think about his own health, and was asking me a lot of questions about, hey, Mike, tell me what you're going through. Tell me what your creatinine level is. Tell me about your BUN. And, we discussed a lot of things, and I was just kind of taken back because Nasser's there, like showing a big interest in me, but I could tell he was just looking for information, because now looking back at it, I think he was going through some of the same health issues and was probably trying to, self-diagnose and maybe heal himself. But I just remember us having that conversation. I just remember, Nasser talking to me, asking me all these questions about my health. And, now in hindsight, in retrospect, I'm sure he was doing it for his own self, health. So.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, I've been around bodybuilders since I started training when I was a teenager back in Don Peters' gym before it was Gold's Gym with Lee Haney and Gasperi and, all the way through the 80s, and trained with top powerlifters and everybody. But Nasser was, I want to say, a different level of reckless. He was long retired at that point. And the first time I met him, he told me that the synthol was spreading through his body like a cancer. And he was getting deep tissue work all the time to break up the scar tissue. And then the very next morning we met to train, and he flexed his bicep, and he's like, yeah, I did it here, here, and here. And right then I knew he had a screw loose, because he was telling me the night before that, this stuff was killing him, but he was still injecting it into him, and he wasn't competing.
Yeah. Bodybuilders are, it's a different kind of thing. Because I've met so many other bodybuilders, amateurs, pro bodybuilders, and, I would say to them, like, hey, are you getting your blood work done? And a lot of them just kind of take the stance of, no, I don't want to get my blood work done. I don't want to find out what's going on. Then I might have to do something about it, or I'd ask them, do you check your blood pressure? They're like, no, not at all. I don't do that. Why? So it's kind of interesting how they just have that, like you said, that reckless attitude of like, they're going full steam ahead. They know what they're doing is wrong. But I think as bodybuilders, we got so focused on that prize that it's, you take the risks. Now I'm no better. I mean, I know I was getting my blood work done, and I would read them and take in the data, but there was a point in my life where I was taking it in, and my blood pressure kept going up and up and up, and I wasn't doing anything about it. So I was no better. I was getting the results and at least getting the information, and really just looking at it and being like, oh, boy, that's really bad. Oh, well, back to the gym, so you have to kind of take that information and then do something with it. But as far as bodybuilding goes, it's a 100% kind of sport, and you have to do drugs and a lifestyle and things that are not the best for your health, so
well, I had the unfortunate, but maybe turned out to be fortunate experience. When I was 19, I competed when I was 18, I competed at Team America and the Team USA, and I won the USA. And then I took second to Sean Ray at the Team America. And the following year,
what year was that?
That was 1985.
Okay. Because I was literally just looking through muscle memory and I didn't get to the point because I wanted to see when Sean Ray won the nationals. And I think that was somewhere around 87. So, but that 86. Sounds great. 86.
It was 86.
Yeah. I know it was Atlantic City, but I couldn't remember the year. So you competed with him in 85. That's awesome.
Yeah, he was 19. I was 18 at that time. And then he went to the following year, I went to Team America, and he was competing against Eddie Robinson there.
I remember Eddie.
But I think it was was it North Americans they were having there? I think it was North Americans, or maybe they were having there something. But he was in the open division with Eddie Robinson, and I was in the team. And that thing was fixed for sure, because Sean definitely deserved to win. Like, Eddie Robinson was not beating him. but he did.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching the whole thing. I mean, Eddie was big and everything. He was impressive, but like Sean was detail and everything. He was just another level.
Yeah.
But I think then maybe it was either that later that year or the following year that Sean won the nationals.
Yeah, 86 sounds about right. I mean, that was right when
Yeah.
I started my competitive career in 1985. But I do remember when Sean won the overall at the nationals. I think he was a light heavyweight, and I think Phil Hill won the heavyweight, and there was Vinnie Comerford, I think, won the middleweight. But there were also like awesome bodybuilders in that show. I think Troy Zucolato was in that show as well. I don't think Dennis Newman, but there was some other bodybuilder that had like a pompadour that, but I mean, the competitor list from that nationals when Sean Ray won was pretty stacked. So,
yeah, they were all back then.
Yeah.
The level of competition was way high.
Yeah. It was an exciting time.
And it was hard to turn pro back then because they only gave pro cards out for nationals and like one at the USA, and that was it.
Yeah, you had to win the overall at the North American. You had to win the overall at the USA, which means you had to beat all the weight classes. And then your class, you could turn pro by winning your class at the nationals. But it was usually just the heavyweight or the light heavyweight that kind of went anywhere because, you know, middleweights are usually smaller. And what are you going to do when you win the lightweight, you know, class at the nationals?
Right. Well, the class winners at the nationals got a pro card, and I think it was at the USA the overall got a pro card, but not North Americans back then.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was just the USA and nationals.
Yeah, I know when I won, you had to win the overall.
Yeah, as I was saying, that was later. You're talking about 10 years later. But when I did the teen nationals at 19. A few weeks later, I ended up in the emergency room with ulcerative colitis.
Oh,
spent 6 months in the hospital, nearly died.
Isn't that what Mike Morris had?
Yes, same exact thing.
Okay.
And actually, years later, I competed in his show, and I told him, I had the same thing as you. And he's like, "How are you competing?" And I'm like, "I just do it." He's like, "I don't understand how you can do it." But that was many years later.
So explain to me just a little bit about what, as I understand it, it's affects your colon specifically, and just explain to me a little bit about so I'm educated on what
it's basically autoimmune disease, and basically you have ulcers in your colon. And like I ended up being in the hospital for almost 6 months, almost died twice, and then they had to remove my entire colon, and I had something called pull-through surgery, where they basically attach your small intestine to your rectum, and you just don't have a colon.
Wow.
And it's pretty crazy. And especially at 19 years old, I just came off competing bodybuilding. I didn't know what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
But after that, I didn't think I could compete in bodybuilding because I don't know. I just thought I couldn't do it. And anyways, got in a bunch of trouble.
I didn't think you could do it either.
What's that?
Sounds like Mike Francois didn't think you could do it either.
No, he quit after that. He retired. He didn't think he could do it. And I could understand because at that point, like I was like, oh, I just had this huge surgery. I got this scar on my stomach. I don't think I can compete. Anyways, I ended up getting in a bunch of trouble, ended up going to prison for 5.5 years. And that took me out of bodybuilding competition for a while. And like I said, it was unfortunate, but maybe fortunate, because the one thing I learned from that is that I wasn't invincible.
Yeah.
Before that, I had this, I could do anything. I could take anything. I'm super strong, and I could just, I thought I was invincible, literally. And actually in prison, I actually had to train natural for 5.5 years. I still kept training, and I was able to maintain a good amount of size and strength, pretty much all my size and strength, just training without even drugs. Okay. And then when I got out of prison, I had no intention of competing. I was just training. And one day I was working as a marketing manager, and I used to train at John Lloyd's Gold's Gym in Northridge. And I was on a stationary bike, and these guys were all getting ready for some Ironman show in the Masters. And John said to me, "Hey, fat boy." And I wasn't fat, but he's just messing with me. He goes, you think you can compete in 6 weeks? And he was sort of like challenging me. And I'm thinking, you don't know who I am. Mm-hmm. So I jumped in. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. So I dieted for 6 weeks, jumped in the show. And I think I took like 5th. It was my first show in like 8-9 years. Wow. But I came back from that with a slightly different attitude than when I was younger, as far as like PEDs and everything else.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was invincible.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to talk about like when you started, I remember hearing before you turned pro, you had a certain amount of PEDs that you used to get to a certain level. And then after you turned pro, you felt the need to ramp it up.
Right. Well, the first time I ever took gear, I started very small. I started with like 5 milligram D-ball. I think I took 5 a day. I think I took like an 8-week cycle. After that cycle, I think I took like 12 or maybe 16 weeks off. And then the next cycle, I think, was the same thing. Maybe I added just a little bit of DECA to it. And then that cycle might have lasted maybe 8 or 10 weeks. And then the off period for that was maybe the same thing, 12 weeks off or maybe just a little longer. But it seemed like each cycle that I would do, progressively, I would add like a little more, kind of like a progressive overload, just like with my training. Because I started as a teenager. And, bodybuilding is all about building your body, getting bigger.
You were about, what, 14 when you started, you said?
I started working out at the age of 12. At the age of 13, I went to a world gym, and this world gym just had lots of bodybuilders and powerlifters, and there was a competition poster on the wall. And I did my first show at the age of 14, 1985. And I competed, obviously, natural when I was 14, natural through 15, 16. And I'm still a little hazy exactly when I started my cycle. I think at one point I said I waited till my 18th birthday, but as I've been thinking about it more, and I might have started before, somewhere in the age of 17, but it's somewhere around there, 17 or 18. But to answer your question, the cycles just got more and more stuff stacked together, higher doses. And it was basically just a progressive overload of, once I started going up through the years, just like my competitive career. I did the teen nationals in 1990. I did the junior nationals in 91, 92, 93, 94. And then I didn't place. I did third in the teen nationals in 1990. In 1991, I did the junior nationals, and that was the year that Paul DeMeo won and Kevin Laverne got second. So obviously I didn't place in that competition. When I say I didn't place, I didn't make the top 15 in the 1991 junior nationals. And then I would do the 1992 junior nationals. I didn't make the top 15 there. 93 junior nationals. I didn't make the top 15 there. Now I would do regional shows leading up to there, and I might win my class in the overall, but then going to the national level, it would be like didn't make the top 15, you're out of there. And when you're not in the top 15 in a national show, you go out for the prejudging, you just go out, do your quarter turns. And if they don't pick you for the top 15, you don't even do your compulsory. You grab your bag and go home. So that's a little discouraging. So I went through the 3 years of that, but then finally placing fourth in the 1994 junior nationals. And then from there, I started doing the USA, North Americans. But everything was just a constant progression of building my body. I mean, my first competition when I was 14, I wasn't even at full height yet. I was probably 5'5" or something like that. I think I weighed 114 pounds, something like that. I was pretty thin, but I was still ripped. Teen nationals, I was a middleweight. 1991 junior nationals, I went up to a light heavyweight. And then I was a light heavyweight through 95. And then I think somewhere around 97, I squeaked up to the heavyweight class. But at 5'7", I was still, as a heavyweight, I was coming in contest day, weighing in probably 204, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that means usually about the week before, a couple weeks before, I'm like 220. And by the time I drop my water, for me, every time I weighed in a competition, I was always lighter than I thought I was going to be. Like once I got into the heavyweight class, you know, if you're 2 weeks out, I'm 222. I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to come in probably like 210, something like that. But I stuck to my diet real hard, and I always wanted to come in super hard, grainy condition. So every time I just ran into a competition, it just always seemed like I weighed myself lighter. And I'm sure you know this, and people have said this before. That time of year, some people thought the NPC was maybe setting the scales just a little lighter because, you know, back then a lot of people were trying to make weight classes, taking a lot of diuretics, cutting their water, wearing a sweatsuit before. And, you know, some people were passing out on stage and having some trouble. So there were murmurings that sometimes the scale was set just a little light so people weren't completely killing themselves to make the weight class. But that's kind of just hearsay and rumors. So
I didn't hear about that, but I want to touch on something that you mentioned. You started training at 12, and I also started training at 12. And I also trained in hardcore bodybuilding gyms starting at about 14. At first, I trained in the Weider weight set that my father bought me. You know, it's the bench press with the cement weights.
Yeah, the cement.
And then
yes.
I went to the racket club. Yeah, then I went to the racket club with him on the weekends. And then there was a poster up. Tom Platz was guest posing in the 1981 Olympia 1 week before that, and at a college near me. And I went to the guest posing, and I met Tom, and he gave me his upper body manual and his lower body manual, and I saw him guest pose. And right then, I was like, "That's what I want to do."
Yeah.
He looked unbelievable.
He's awesome.
And then I had to go to the real bodybuilding gym. So that's when I went to the Don Peters gym in Reseda, and that's where Bertil Fox was training and all those guys. And then shortly after that, I went to Steve Davis gym. That was another hardcore gym out in the valley. Steve Davis, he was a pro bodybuilder that owned that one. And Albert Beckles was training there. And my first coach was Mike Sable, who was a Mr. Universe. And I was 16. I did my first competition. And my cycle was Anavar, the 2 milligram, I think it were 2.5 milligram footballs.
Yep.
I took 3 a day for 30 days before the contest.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got quite a bit stronger, even dieting. And I won my first show at 16. And the reason I mentioned that is, you know, I remember being in the teen divisions back then, and the teen divisions were packed. I mean, we had a lot of teenagers competing. I'd go to I probably did, I don't know, 15 shows as a teenager because I wanted to compete everywhere I could. And every time I went to a show, there was a lot of teenagers competing, and we don't see that anymore at all.
No. It's a shame. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't see young guys like competing. I think they recently said nobody under 18 can even compete.
Oh, really? I thought I saw something. Did you see something online? I saw something online like Lee Haney is hosting a teenage bodybuilding competition. It looks like it's not sanctioned by the NPC or anything, but
I think it is an NPC though.
Oh, is it?
And
okay.
And the rule is nobody under 18 is allowed to compete.
Really?
Yeah. They passed that like a year ago.
That's not cool.
Which, I know, because like I said, I was competing. By the time I was 18, I had probably won, 5 or 6 shows.
Yeah.
By then. And so but we don't see that anymore. I actually have a core gym, and there's a lot of young guys in there, but I don't see they're not hardcore like we were back in the day. Yeah. I mean, even as a teenager, I was training next to pros, and I was training as hard as them, trying to be like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know you were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And then, like you, after that first competition I won, then my cycles progressed into bigger cycles, and I started with taking Trembolone and other things. Yeah. So, but I never really got crazy high on the dosages. I think because of back when I was doing it in the 80s, I don't think like we didn't know what crazy high was. It just wasn't a thing. I think guys would take like a gram of gear total before a contest, because to us we thought that was a lot. I don't think it was until
at one time it was. I know at one point I had the Dan Duchesne, I don't know what he called it. You remember Dan Duchesne, right? He had some leaflet book that he sold. You could get it ordered out of the back of a magazine, and the center pages were all in red, like a red construction paper with dark print. And it was photocopy proof basically. And he would have some cycles in there. And then at one point in time, Bill Phillips came up with his, I was following Bill Phillips for a while. He used to have like little leaflets that he would send out. It was basically just pieces of paper stapled together. And I guess I ordered out of the back of the magazine. They would just mail them to the house, and they would have little cycles in there, or he would interview people and would talk about so-and-so. Sometimes they would remain anonymous, and it would kind of talk about what they were taking. And then, Bill Phillips eventually came up with like the anabolic reference guide, and the first edition, then the second edition. And I don't know how long.
Bill Llewellyn, actually.
Who's that? Was it
Bill Llewellyn?
Oh, okay. Maybe.
Bill Phillips was a supplement manufacturer, but Bill Llewellyn is the one that made the anabolic handbook, or what reference guide, that big thick book.
Yeah. Oh, maybe I'm getting the names confused.
Yeah, it was Llewellyn. I know because I was in it when I had a lab.
Okay.
My lab got featured in his book in 2000, and I want to say it was 2007.
Yeah, but I was just making the fact that a lot of those books, I had a lot of those books, and they would give you, they try to show you with pictures, what's real, what's fake, what's going around. But they would have a description of each one of the cypionate or propionate or whatever the drug might be. And then it would give you an approximate dosage of what people would take. And I know I read something somewhere. I don't know what it was from. It was probably from something underground. But it said kind of what you referenced about, like, if you really want to get big and you really want to get size to compete with where you're, approaching, national level, turning pro, a test, a gram a week is kind of that's kind of like the bread and butter, so to speak, a gram a week a test. So
I think that was Paul Bornstein came out with his book, this guy from England, and he was promoting higher dosages and what was that stuff that blocks cortisol? He was promoting that and all kinds of crazy things.
That never seemed to take off, though, did it?
They used it one year when the diuretics were banned. They were using that for contest prep, and that stuff was when you block cortisol, you're basically, it's not a good thing. You feel everything.
Yeah, I believe it. I just remember reading about it, and on paper it all seemed great. Saying, like, if you can limit your cortisone, which is your catabolic hormone, you're just going to grow completely out of control. And on paper it looked all good. We know in the real world sometimes things don't work out that way.
Yeah, it was called Cytodrin, and basically, cortisol is responsible for inflammation in your body, and also pain management.
Yeah.
And if you don't have any, well, you'll become super inflamed and in a lot of pain, and you'll feel like near death. And I took it before back then, and yeah, that you basically felt like death in 3 days.
Yeah, I've never taken that before. I've never taken there's only a few things that I have not taken. That's one of them, and DNP is another one.
Right. Yeah, I heard about DNP, and when I heard it could cook your organs, I was like, I don't need that.
Yeah. And me living in New
But
Jersey,
I never had a problem getting conditioned just by dieting. And so I didn't really think that was even necessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you, so as you progressed in bodybuilding, as you said, like progressive overload, your resistance went up, your foods goes up, and your drugs went up as well.
Correct.
And it went up to, I believe you said it was what, about 2 to 3 grams at the highest.
Yes. At the highest, I think it was about 3 grams a week.
So when you were progressing from amateur to pro, about what time, when was it you decided to push the gear harder?
Like I said, there wasn't a time where I was, like I really need to kind of light this rocket to take off. It just, each cycle was, I would keep a diary of everything I would do. And I would just kind of look at my dosages from the last cycle. And I was like, okay, well, I can either, I took in the data of how much I grew, how much size I put on, if I gained any weight throughout the year at all. I would use my competition weight from year to year to see if I'd actually put on muscle. And then obviously looking at photos of myself from competition. So if I did a show and I weighed light heavyweight and I came in at like 192 one year, and then the next year I weighed in at like 197, and I'd know I'd put on like that amount of lean muscle. And I'd also, of course, look at the pictures and make sure that my condition was the same or harder. And then I would say, okay, I put on X amount of pounds for that year. And then when I would put my cycles together, I would look at my cycles of what I did last time. And I was like, okay, well, time to crank this up a little bit. If I took 2 cc's here, like now it's 2.5. And then once it was at 2.5, now it's okay. Now it's time to go 3. And then after it was 3 cc's, like, okay, now time to load up another syringe and do 3 cc, now 3.5, something like that. I do have calendars tucked away somewhere, and I would have a lot of my cycles and diaries written down on that. And I got to go back and reference some of that because it has a lot of really good information. And just like we're talking about, what you think you did, and when you write stuff down, sometimes you reference
Right.
it, and sometimes it's a little different. So I really need to kind of dig those up and look at them, because that'll actually show what I was actually taking. And it's on a calendar, so it'll actually show the year and the month, of what I was taking.
So in hindsight, looking back on it, you reached a certain point where you were taking a certain amount of gear, and then you pushed the gear higher in dosages and different compounds. And in hindsight, did you actually see, by taking more results? Because obviously you got to the top of, as big as any pro out there competing.
Yeah. I did get bigger and I did get stronger. By me increasing my dosages in my gear, that was one form of overload. I would always try to eat more food, increase my calories, increase my protein. So that would increase. And my body weight would increase, and I would get stronger. Like when I would train in the gym, I'd be like, okay, I can incline 455 on the incline. My next goal now is to do 495 on the incline. Everything was in my mind was a constant overload of everything. But in hindsight, I wish I would have kind of got to a certain dosage, and that dosage would be somewhere probably right after I turned pro. Because when I turned pro, my waist was still nice and tight. Everything was very hard. I still had great size. But I think at some point after I turned pro, when I did bump up those dosages, things got a little distorted. It got a little too big. My waist got like a little wider. I think painkillers kind of enhanced my gut and my waist thickness a little bit. So that is absolutely another thing I would change. But I guess back then, everything was full steam ahead, and I never thought to just the dosages that I was taking when I turned pro and soon after, just to leave it there. If I would have done that, I might have been a little more successful, might have placed a little higher, but all coulda, woulda, shoulda, you know?
Well, I used to take, I think, probably around 1,500 to milligrams to 2 grams max right before a contest. And then I competed in a show called Excalibur, and there was an Italian guy there, short guy, but pretty jacked. And we ended up, he was staying in LA for a little while, so we started training. And he told me the secret was 4 grams of test a week.
Okay.
And I had never heard of anything like that prior to that. As far
That's
as that
2
goes.
bottles a week. That's 2
What's
bottles. That I was going to say that's 2 bottles of test a week. Okay?
Depending on the dosage of the test, but yes.
Right.
Now you have test 400. I when I had a lab, I made test 700, but that's a whole different story.
I took test 400 one time. It swelled up my butt cheek so bad. I was like, no, I'm not going to take that anymore. So, but that was when it first came out. And when you have that much test, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you have that much test in 1 cc, you have to add, what is it, acetone or something to dilute it in the oil so it's absorbable. Am I right?
No, you need a certain ratio of benzoate and benzyl alcohol mixed into the oil to keep it in solution. And then you have to have enough esters, like the test 400 is cypionate and anthate and propionate in the right ratio. And if it's done right with the right amount of benzoate and not too much benzyl alcohol, then you won't get the pip.
Yeah.
But
I always noticed anytime I took something that was 400 or higher in 1 cc, it always gave me soreness, swollenness, redness.
Well, they didn't know how to make it.
Yeah, probably.
They didn't know how. I ran the biggest lab in probably North America back in 2006 and 2007, and nobody ever got a lump or an infection from anything that I ever made, but I knew how to do it. It's just you have to have the right ratio of benzoate and benzyl alcohol, and also you have to filter your stuff so doesn't have bacteria in it.
Right.
And I think back then a lot of people were just like throwing raws into oil and just maybe put some benzyl alcohol in there and go with it because they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
So, but no, if it's done right, you can do it. But anyways, I took the 4 grams for like 2 weeks, and I just noticed I wasn't feeling great, and my strength really wasn't going up, and I just felt like I was holding a bunch of water. And I wasn't seeing results from it. So I think I stuck with it maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And after that, I was like, I didn't see a benefit to doing all that. I wasn't getting progress from it. Maybe I was just doing too much tests and not enough other gear. But for me, it just didn't work. So I went back to my normal, gram a week sort of thing. And I actually, like you, I didn't get the distended waist until I started really messing with GH and insulin, and that was many years later. Yeah. Well, after I started messing with the GH and insulin, that's when my waist started getting bigger, and I think it was just from pushing so much food with the GH and insulin that I think that's really what does it. Matter of fact, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
You just become insulin resistant from taking so much GH and insulin and trying to push so much food.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's the gear. I think it's that.
Yeah. Well, it does inflame your gut, and it makes everything grow. So it stands to reason when you're taking in that much food and that much calories, your stomach, your digestive tract is gonna grow as well. So, but I do think
it's not like your organs are growing. There was a theory that your organs are getting bigger. It's not really that, because you could take the GH and insulin, eat a bunch of food, your stomach would be all bloated, but then the next morning it'd be flat again. So if your organs grew, that wouldn't happen.
Right.
So what happens is you can't digest the carbs and the food, so it's basically sitting in your stomach rotting and producing a whole bunch of gas. And then your stomach is distended because you've got all this gas in your stomach. And the problem is, you can't stop pushing food, because once you're on that cycle, you keep needing to feed the mass. So you keep needing to eat the food, and you need the GH and the insulin to digest all the food.
Right.
So it's kind of a never ending cycle to do it.
Yeah. It's a vicious cycle. So,
yeah.
But
but I was wondering if you, just from the gear alone, increasing the dosages, do you think that really helped you get bigger, or do you think it was adding the GH and insulin later on that actually put on the extra size you needed as a pro?
I think it did help me get bigger, but I don't think it helped me get bigger to my benefit, if that makes any sense. I think there's something to be said for, right when I turned pro, right about that area, I'd already built up over the years a certain amount of size at that point, that size that kind of in my eyes looked, pretty perfect. So once you already have the size, in hindsight, it probably definitely would have been better if I didn't increase the doses, if I would have just kept them right where they were, or maybe even backed them off, because, you need the steroids to build the size. But once you have the size, I think it would have been to my benefit to kind of just keep everything cruising right around the year 2000, right when I turned pro, instead of increasing it, and just, stuck it out that way. So, yeah, I think there's
I've actually personally,
I don't think anybody can tell somebody what the sweet spot is, because everybody's different. Everybody has different size, and and that's kind of like a call that individual bodybuilder has to make for himself, or get a good coach that has a good eye that can say, you look perfect right here. Maybe you should not keep increasing it. So that's a little food for thought too.
Well, I think it's finding the dosage that you're making progress in the way of consistent, steady gains, but not necessarily holding a shit ton of water. And I think when you just all of a sudden up the dosage fast, you think you're getting really, really, bigger, but you're really just holding a bunch of water. And actually, I've actually proven this with some training clients with DEXA scans, where I had a guy that, he blew up to 280 pounds, and he was competing, the year before at 222. But on the DEXA scan, he didn't have any more muscle. He just had more fat and water. He looked big, looked big in clothes, but he really wasn't carrying any more muscle. Not really.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of deceive yourself thinking, you put on all this weight in a hurry, but that's not muscle. It's just a bunch of water.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
and then, so of course, when you back off on the dosages, that water is going to go away, and you're going to be right back where you started.
Yeah.
I've actually done this on myself. I've hit a point where I'm at a plateau where I feel like I'm not making progress, and maybe even going backwards, and then backed off on my dosages and started making progress. And I think that's just because, at a certain point, your body starts getting toxic. And then when you're toxic, you can't digest your food properly. You're not sleeping right and all these other things. And then you back off on your dosages, and you feel better, and your training is better, and your eating is better, and you start growing again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes overtraining can be a part of it too, not getting the right sleep, not getting the right amount of food.
Oh, definitely, for sure.
Sometimes your nervous system just needs a break. I know some guys that go to the gym 6 days a week and stay consistent with that, never take any time off. And sometimes just even a simple 3-day break, or, just a little break in the routine, just to let your whole body and your nervous system recover, and then come back and start growing again. So,
yep. I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned, now I know you ran into a little problem with narcotics, basically ketamine and what was the other thing? Nubane.
Yeah, opiates,
And
all opiates. Yeah, it was Nubane, but then
yeah,
once,
and I think
yeah,
you and originally you started doing it. You mentioned because of injuries, or maybe it was because of people around you doing it. And I wanted to explore that a little bit because I have already, not with those compounds, but in general. And when you first started that, what injuries were you dealing with?
I didn't have any injuries when I first started it. I had a bottle of Nubane that was kind of just came through my arsenal, and I kind of knew that it was not good at the time, but there were some things swirling around, talking about, it can help if it takes away your pain, you can kind of push through your pain threshold. It was kind of touted a little bit as a anti-catabolic at one point, but mostly in my head, I knew like, this is not something that's going to help me grow. I don't think this is going to help me compete. But it was just sometime in the off season where I was like, I've had it for so long. I just wanted to give it a try. And I took it sub Q, and I just took a little bit sub Q, and it was almost like I had a drink or so, helped me feel relaxed. And I was like, okay, well, don't do that anymore. But then once I did it once, I did it again a few months later. And it was also just the time when Nubane was getting more and more popular. But it just kind of, as an addiction happens, once you get in India, everything, it just started taking it a little more often, until eventually I was maybe just doing it once a month. And then it just became once a weekend, until it eventually became every day. And then once I moved to California is when I started doing it intravenously. And there was a point in time where, when I think I'd already started the Nubane, is when the whole Oxycontin craze came around. And the doctor that I was going to that was prescribing my gear was prescribing the Oxycontin, and I was selling the Oxycontin. So I got Oxycontin passing through my hands all the time. And I was like, well, let me try this Oxycontin, and I'll break just a little tiny piece off and try that. And, it's an opiate. It makes you feel good. I would take it in the off season, and I would just try a little bit of it. And that's how addictions work. It would make you feel really good. And I thought I was in control, and I would be like, all right, well, I took that on Wednesday. Let me just put that away. I won't do that again for months and months. And it just became a little more often and a little more often. And just Oxycontin is very, very, they're all very addictive. And yeah, I was kind of
Addictive.
I was hooked before I even knew it. So
and you mentioned at one point you took one pill, and then at a certain point later you were taking 10 at a time.
I took I took Percocet before, I took Vicodin before. I don't know about 10 at a time. But I think there was one time, there was times where I was getting the Oxycontin 80s, and maybe 2 a day at one point. I mean, they're strong. So, I mean, 2 a day that's 160 milligrams a day. And yeah, I didn't take 10 of those a day, believe me. So.
Oh, I just heard you on Ron Harris. You said something about 1 went to 10 or something like that.
Oh, maybe it was the units.
But so
maybe the units of the Nubane or something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So basically, you really weren't taking it for injuries. You were just taking it to take it.
Yeah, I was taking it because it made me feel good. And I remember specifically getting ready for the Budapest Pro, and I must have been on it regular. But once I got into my pre-contest prep for that show, I phased it out of my routine. And I just kind of did that through cutting it down, perseverance. I must have went through withdrawal, but I was already in pre-contest mode. And yeah, I would come off it. I came off it completely. But then the show would be done, the pre-contest prep would be over, and then I would get back into the off-season training. Things would be more relaxed. And then boredom would hit or something, and then I would think, well, just take a little, and then all of a sudden now you're back on that train again. So addiction's it's a really tough thing, you know. So I know there was a lot of times where I, just like prepping for the Budapest Pro, I would fight and crawl and scratch to get off, and then I'd be off the train, I'd be clean, I'd do the show and get my placing, everything would be great, and then after the competition, you try a little bit. Now all of a sudden you're right back on the train again, and you're stuck.
So I developed Crohn's about I want to say it was 2000, about 2015, no 2014. I was diagnosed in 2015, and it was a crazy. I didn't know what it was, and it took him like over a year to diagnose me. I just was in pain, shitting blood and everything, and didn't know what it was. But anyways, long story short, I have it under control now through diet and other things. But they had prescribed me what is it, Vicodin, and I've had that prescription for. I still have it for I guess what are we in 2025? So what is that, 11 years? Or yeah, I think about 11 years. I've had that script, and I've used it on, when I have a flare up, which now I don't have very many flare ups, so I don't really need it so much. But I never had the desire to just take it just to take it. In other words, I never wanted to take more of it, or just if I wasn't in some kind of pain, just to take it. So I've noticed some people. I was training with a girl. I want to say this was around 2011, and I had Adderall, and we were taking it as a pre-workout. And she started training with me, and I gave her a piece of an Adderall. And in 1 week, she was asking me for more. And like more than just for training. She wanted it all the time. And I said, whoa, wait a second here. You're not just taking this for training. You're all of a sudden just taking it. And anyways, then I told her, no, I'm not giving you anymore because I think you're getting addicted. And she didn't really like that. So she, anyways, found a doctor to prescribe her, and she got fully addicted to that stuff and still is to this day.
Yeah.
And I took it just to train. And then I realized that I think that's partly what caused the Crohn's to flare up, by taking that Adderall. So I stopped taking it, and I don't even take any stimulants anymore. My pre-workout is 100 milligrams of caffeine with a pump product. That's it. But I feel like some people, just maybe it's more addictive personality. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Are more prone to just want to take things.
Some people are just more have addict behavior, or you could just say are addicts. They want to. Same thing with alcohol. Some people, once they have that one drink, they can't stop.
Right.
I mean, I took a lot of painkillers and opiates because when I took them, they made me feel good.
Right.
If I would be off of opiates for a while, once I started taking them, like I said, I would be right back on that train again. And then I would be taking them like every day. But once you're on that train, you might be taking them every day and you feel good for a week. But then after a while, you start noticing you get irritable. You're carrying around your pills with you. You got to make sure you get your dose. Like if you take your one in the morning time, and then later on in the day, you might be out and about, and then all of a sudden you feel it draining out of your system. Now you start, like, your body starts craving it. Now you're on that train again. It's like it's controlling your body and making you want to take more. And it just took me a while, years, to realize, you can't get back on that train ever again. You just can't do it. I mean, recently in the past 5 years or so, I would go and get dental work done, like an implant. You have to get a tooth pulled or something. And the doctor prescribed me Vicodin. And I was like, I'm not even going to go fill this script, because I know if I just start taking them, even if it's just pain for a tooth, like I'll take it and I'll take it to almost get high. And then I'm afraid that once I start taking that, I feel I'm going to start looking for other stuff as well. So yeah, for some people, you just have to kind of be like, I don't want to get back on that train anymore.
So I know bodybuilders, well, some bodybuilders do this. Maybe a lot of bodybuilders do this type of stuff. But I don't know that it's necessarily necessary or productive even for bodybuilding. I think it just became, I think, like you said in another podcast, you start taking injections of steroids and whatever things. And so it seems normal to just take other things.
Yep. You have an arsenal of drugs that you take. And what's one couple of Vicodin every day going to do to me? But
right.
It's kind of one of the reasons that I'm trying to preach to people and teach people that opiates and painkillers do not help your competitive career in bodybuilding or anything at all. They're not going to, I mean, if you need them for pain management, that's something different. You can have like a benefit to risk ratio of like, how much pain do you have? How much chronic pain do you have? And this makes my quality of life better by taking this. But as far as just bodybuilding or any other area of your life, painkillers and opiates stay away from them. You shouldn't take them at all. You should view it like heroin. Don't do it.
Well, it is heroin. It's narcotic. It is a opioid. So it pretty much is heroin.
Yeah.
In a different form.
When people are addicts and like whenever they're competing or doing whatever they're doing, sometimes they make justifications, and I just kind of want to tell people to stay away from them. Don't do them. Save yourself the health and the your money and your competitive career, and just don't do them. Don't do them.
Now, I know you ran into some kidney problems, and you think, and you believe that was related to the opioids.
Yes, absolutely. Now, of course, me not controlling my blood pressure for years was a big contributing factor. I'm sure the amount of gear that I was taking was a contributing factor. Diuretics for a competition, the yo-yo dieting, dropping 40 pounds and cutting my water before a show, and then blowing up, 30 pounds in 2 weeks after every competition is not good either. But yeah, once I added opiates and Nubain to that's simply just throwing gasoline on the fire of something that was already just starting to burn out of control. So,
well, it just occurs to me, I think when you maybe using those opioids, you kind of numb your senses to, anything being wrong.
Yeah.
So then it maybe you're pushing the gear harder and you're doing things more than you normally would have, just because it doesn't seem like it's bothering you.
Yeah, you're not in the right state of mind. You're high. You're high all the time. So, and that's not a good way to compete or to go through life.
And so you once you realized you had the kidney problems, you decided to go cold turkey and just get off everything completely.
Yeah, I just the doctor went to a doctor, and then I went to the nephrologist, and the nephrologist just gave it to me straight. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He's like, this is where you're at. This is where your blood pressure is. My blood pressure was at 220 over 130 or something ridiculous like that. And he just said, we just have to get you prepared and set up for dialysis in the next year or so. He said something like that. And I was already training at Gold's Gym and saw Tom Prince every day, and he was going through dialysis, and Don Long had his issues and some other, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. No way. I'm not doing dialysis. So I would ask him, what do you got to give me? What do you got to prescribe me? How do I get better? And he was saying, there's nothing I can do. He's like, I can give you medication to control your blood pressure, but nothing else. So I decided to just do my own research and do my own holistic training. And the one thing I knew I needed to cut out was just all the gear that I was taking completely. I mean, that was my solution to it. Cut that out completely, retire from bodybuilding, come off all the painkillers. And then I did just that. But the painkillers kind of kept rolling back around because I did come off the painkillers. I got myself off, and then I don't remember how long I stayed off for, a couple months, but then something would happen. Maybe it was a party, maybe it was an after party at the Olympia, but something would come around where, again, here I am back on the train again, like the party's over, but now I'm still back on taking these Percocet over and over again. But my solution to heal myself was just retire from bodybuilding and stop taking and doing everything and anything that I thought was damaging my kidneys. So.
And I got to applaud you for doing that, because, we know lots of other people, including Boston Lloyd, that, he was told point blank that he needed dialysis and a kidney transplant, and he just wouldn't stop. And he just kept going until he killed himself.
Yeah.
It's I hard. Know because he was a good friend of mine, and I spoke to him daily, pretty much up to the day he passed. And he just, I told him, you're going to kill yourself. And everybody else was telling him that. And he just didn't, he didn't want to stop.
Yeah.
Didn't want to stop.
Yeah.
And he wasn't even a pro at your level.
Yeah. You have to make that decision to, do I want to really get better or not? Because if you waver and you're like, but I want to compete, I still want to work out. Okay, maybe I'll stop competing, but I still want to get big. I want to take all the gear. Like, you just can't do it that way. You have to kind of eliminate all that completely out of your life. And I still do it to this day. I still control my diet. I still make sure I completely limit, like, alcohol. I don't smoke. I mean, there's everything that I put into my body. I was like, is this helping and nurturing my kidneys, or is this something that might affect my kidneys? Even if it's an aspirin or a Tylenol. I was sick a couple weeks ago, and my fever, I had a fever, and I was like, and I took a little bit of Advil here and there, but I was like, I don't want to take this. But again, there's that quality of life and that benefit to risk ratio. But yeah, you have to make a decision. Do I really, really want to get better? And you have to acknowledge all the things you have to do to get better. And as competitive bodybuilders, obviously some people have a hard time doing that,
Well, I mean, you had a major hit in the face, and you saw people around you, Flex Wheeler, Tom Prince, and other people, losing their lives. And obviously you knew that, it was either stop or you're going to go the same route as them.
Yeah.
So I think you didn't really have a choice in the matter. No, if you wanted to live anyways.
Right. Yeah. Well, I had a choice. I mean, they invited me to, after I retired and moved here to Arizona, they invited me to come do the Wild Card Olympia. And I've talked about this before, where I was a little bit conflicted. I was like, I'm not going to miss out on the Olympia. I'm going to go, but I was like, maybe I'll take just a little bit of Winstro and a little bit of Primibol. And I started bargaining, and I was like, well, I can take some of the stuff that's not so bad. And I was like, no, stick to what you said, do the show, you can diet for the show, but don't take any Compluterol, don't take any growth, don't take any anabolics. And, that's what I did. So, yeah, you have to kind of stick with your guns, because if I would have taken, just a little bit of gear, I think I would have compromised my health. And it's just something I'm not willing to do. So
you actually went and competed naturally.
Yes. Yeah. I competed 100% natural in that show, because it was a
how'd you feel about it?
Getting ready for the show, obviously it was discouraging. I mean, my life is an open book, and I just was telling everybody what I was doing. I think Guy Grundy did a photo shoot with me at the Golds, and he's always obviously very open and candid, and he was telling me that, I looked off, and I was like, well, yeah, of course I look off. I'm natural. I just not the same. But I just kind of went through, and I was just kind of watching my body shrink a little bit and watching my body not get as hard and as defined. And, people can look at the pictures and you can obviously see the difference of, I did the Australian Pro, I think in the spring or whenever it was. And then I did the Wildcard Olympia in October. I think it was maybe about 6 months apart. And it's a completely different Mike Morris. But that's the difference between Mike Morris on gear and taking his normal contest prep and everything he does for pro bodybuilding. And then that was Mike Morris, just what happens to the human body after you don't put all those supplements in it. So, but it's a good illustration of, here's a pro bodybuilder completely on gear, and here's a pro bodybuilder 6 months later, completely natural, and what the difference is. And it's pretty dramatic. And when I did that show, that was in 2005, and the internet was really just kind of starting to take off then. And I remember really being hurt and really being crushed by hearing the comments of like, Mike Morris looks terrible. Mike Morris looks like blah, blah, blah. He's completely just all these terrible things. And I was just remember being like crushed and depressed about it. But then as time went on, people kind of heard about like the kidney issues and what happened, and then got more praise and stuff. And but that's just life. I'm just kind of explaining to you what the yo-yo of coming off all the gear and getting smaller. And as a pro bodybuilder, you want to have people say, hey, you look big, you look great, everything, and then when that starts to go away and your body's shrinking and you're buying all new smaller size clothes and things like that, it's tough. It's
so let me ask you a question. Obviously you had the kidney scare, which was real. If you had not had that prognosis, do you think you would have just kept going?
Competing? Absolutely.
Competing, taking the drugs and everything.
Absolutely. 100%. Why would I stop?
Because
I had no reason to stop. I tell people this all the time. When I came back from the Australian Pro, I made the top 5 there. That was my first top 5 finish as a pro. Lee Priest won, Chris Cormier was second. All the other pro shows I did from 2001 to 2005 was like 8th, 10th, 12th, 11th, 15th. I was always not in that first call out. So the Australian Pro was the first time I placed in the top 5. I got a check. I got a free trip to Australia. I was like, man, I'm here. I'm training at Gold's Venice. Like, this is it. No way would I have stopped. No, I would have continued for, I don't know when.
So in hindsight, looking back on it, and like we say, hindsight's 2020. Do you think that you could have reached that same level of success as a pro, not taking all that stuff?
Rephrase your question just a little bit for me. Like, make it a little more specific.
If in hindsight, if you could have done it over again,
Mm-hmm.
could you have reached that same level of success as a pro, the same level of size, conditioning that you were competing at your best, without taking all that stuff?
Well, I mean, I would still have to take all that stuff, but like we talked about earlier, I think if I would have kept my doses around the same from when I turned pro, from 99 to 2000, if I hadn't ramped it up from 2000 to 2001 to 2000, because it was a constant progression of taking more and more stuff. I think if I never got on the painkillers, of course, that's a big one for me. And I think if I would have kept my doses the same right after I turned pro and didn't jack it up from there, I think I would have been a better bodybuilder. Does that answer your question?
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, a lot of people look at pro bodybuilders and they just say, okay, Nick Walker or whoever, they look at him, they're like, oh, massive amounts of drugs. and I don't know specifically what Nick takes or doesn't take. Only Nick knows that. But they look at his physique and they're like, "Oh, this is just massive amounts of drugs." I mean, Lee Haney even came out and kind of straight out said that. And my question is, do you think it's possible to reach that level of development and conditioning in a safer way, not taking so much stuff?
Well, I can only speak for myself. And I think the amount of gear that I took, I needed to take to reach the level that I did. But I'm only speaking for myself. I've talked to a lot of other pro bodybuilders that talk about the gear that they take. And sometimes I'm very surprised and taken back by like, wait a minute, that's all you're taking? Like, seriously? Most of the time I think they're lying and they're not giving me the whole truth. But I think there are some bodybuilders out there. Lee Priest has mentioned it before. I'll drop another name, Rich Jones. Do you remember him? He won the Night of Champions.
I know him.
I think I was talking to him and he was talking to me about, I don't remember what he said he was taking, but a little bit of Winstrol and a little bit of, I was like, what, really? Serious? No, come on. No. So,
but he was on the smaller side too.
So to answer your question, I think there are some bodybuilders that are so genetically gifted and have the right shaped muscle bellies and are whatever you call them, super absorbers or whatever, that respond to a little bit of stuff. So to answer your question, yes, I think there are some bodybuilders that can reach a successful pro level without taking what we call massive doses. Let's say a gram or less of test. Yes, I think that's absolutely possible. I do.
Well, we have two categories of, I want to say, bodybuilders. You have the mass monsters, and then you have the aesthetic, like Sean Ray's. Sean never competed over 210 pounds, but he looked massive because he had just crazy shape and tiny bone structure and just the crazy round muscle bellies. He looked way bigger than he was. Not to say he wasn't big. He had a lot of muscle on him. But I think a Sean Ray probably could get away with taking a lot less gear than, somebody that didn't have, that genetic structure and shape to do that. Versus a Dorian. I mean, I don't know what Dorian did or didn't do. I know what he said. But to be a 270-pound mass monster on stage, I think that's probably different as far as, what is required, maybe.
I think so too.
Obviously, if you're 210 pounds versus 270 pounds, you're talking about a difference of 60 pounds of muscle more.
Yeah. But I think you're correct in thinking that, and there's certain body types, when you look at them, they look like they're taking a lot of gear. And I think it's a lot of the pro bodybuilders today, because I don't see a lot of pro bodybuilders today that have crisp, lean, hard, grainy looking muscles like like a Sean Ray or a Flex Wheeler or a Kevin Levrone or Barry DeMay, where they just have that crispness. It seems like a lot of the top 5 in the Olympia and the Arnold these days, they're huge. They just look a little blown out. They look not as defined.
Well, there's a few reasons for that, and I'm pretty positive I know what it is. Number one, when you take a lot of GH and insulin, or maybe just GH, period, you have more plasma, so you just have more blood volume. So a lot of what you're seeing, the guys are bigger, but that's not muscle bigger. It's just more blood in there. And when a muscle's all pumped up, it just doesn't have definition because it's full of blood.
It gets washed out.
Yeah, like when you train legs, when your legs are super pumped, they're vascular, but you don't have separation.
Yeah,
because there's full of blood. So there's that. There also the synthol, and I don't care what anybody tells you, but when you put a certain amount of synthol in, after a point where the muscle's actually 2 or 3 inches bigger, and you're talking a small muscle like your shoulders and arms, that oil is going to distort everything. You're not going to see the fibers because the oil gets mixed up in there, and you can't see the muscle fibers.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yep. And that's what I see in a lot
remember
of
when Flex Wheeler. Yeah, when Flex Wheeler first started, and he was, hard, grainy, and all that, and as he got bigger, because he kept putting more synthol, and his shoulders got bigger than his head, they didn't have any separation or cuts on them anymore.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I was going to say, and that's what I see in a lot of the top pros now. They just don't. They have big round muscles, but they just don't have the fibers and the separation going through there. Like back in the day, when early 2000s. When you flex, you can see everything just roll right through, and it's crisp and clear. And I think there's a lot of
Dexter Jackson straight out said it.
Yeah.
Dexter Jackson's, he competed through all the different eras, and he said himself he preferred his look in the 80s and 90s to his 2000s look when he was a lot bigger. But he said my 80s, 90s look would not win contests because he needed to be bigger to compete with the bigger guys. He said it himself. He had to use the synthol and the GH and everything to get bigger to be competitive. He said he wouldn't be competitive, even though he liked when he preferred the way he looked at a lighter body weight without doing all that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And the other thing is, I think guys they don't want to, like Dorian said, remember he took the black and white pictures?
Of course.
And he looked crazy. Okay. But he said, when he went to compete in the Olympia a few weeks later, he dropped, 20 pounds or something like that, because he wanted to be super shredded. So he could have opted to stay bigger and fuller and not be as shredded, but he wanted to be super shredded. Whereas the guys nowadays, I don't think they want to they're too scared of each size. So they're trying to stay bigger instead of going for the super peeled look.
Yeah. It would be nice to see some bodybuilder just come in and not chase the size, especially competitors that are already there, like a Derek Lunsford or a Samson, come in 10 or maybe even 15 pounds lighter. I've been to enough bodybuilding shows and enough pro shows to know that whenever there's an upset or whenever there's someone that surprises some people, it seems like it's always the guy that's more conditioned. It's rarely a guy that's like, oh, he just overpowered him with size and, equally as hard. It's the guy that comes in super shredded and stands out from all the rest. And the judges always give it to the guy that's in condition. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. I'd like to see some guy come in.
Martin Fitzwater just did it. He just proved it. At the last Olympia. He was fourth. He was peeled and he looked insane. And he could even maybe taken top 3. And then he was bragging about how he put 10 pounds of stage weight. But when he got to the stage, it didn't look like stage weight. It looked like 10 pounds of water, which it probably maybe 8 pounds of it was water and, blood volume. Yeah. So it really did backfire because he looked better at the lighter weight.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is we can only put on a certain amount of actual muscle tissue every year.
Right. Yep. So,
if you're gaining 10 or 15 pounds in a year on stage, that's not muscle.
Right.
That's blow up.
Yeah.
It's not going to look like muscle.
Yeah. From all the years I competed, I usually, if I put on 5 pounds, like I was talking about where I weighed in at a competition and where I weighed in a competition a year apart, if I put on 5 pounds, if I went from whatever weight to whatever, and I was conditioned and just put on 5 pounds in a year, I was very happy with that. I was very happy with a 5 pound lean muscle gain. meaning I was shredded at this competition at 200, and this show I came in shredded a year later and I weighed 205. I was very happy with that. So,
well, I remember back in our day, you being shredded was like you had to be shredded.
Yeah.
Because conditioning won shows.
Yep.
If you weren't shredded, forget about it. You're not going to win.
Yep. And I think it would nowadays too. I think it would nowadays.
Yeah, but the judges flip-flop with that. It's like Simpson Dowda won the Olympia last year, and he was not near shredded. He was not near shredded. He was nowhere near shredded. He was big. And then he lost to Derek Lunsford at the Arnold Classic because Derek was shredded, and he again was in the same condition, not.
Yeah.
So he got lucky that Hottie was a little bit off and Derek was off. And so he managed to squeak ahead, even though he wasn't shredded. But then that sends a message out to everybody else, be bigger.
Yeah.
But then a few months later, Derek beats him because he's peeled. So now what's the message? Be peeled, right? So, it goes back and forth. And I still think, whoever's the most conditioned probably is going to look the best. I think Hottie or Derek comes in 100%, or even Nick Walker comes in 100%. They're going to beat him based on conditioning, even though he's the biggest.
Yeah. Condition is king. So,
I mean, honestly, right now, when I train my guys, we don't push the gear because I've figured out that, there's a certain amount you need to be able to train and recover and grow. And more than that, just creates more side effects and more water retention.
Yeah. And
not necessarily, it's not going to translate to better on stage.
No, I would always gear down. I would always gear down my dosages as the show approached and cut the test out usually completely, probably 4 weeks out from a show. So, because any kind of compound
things are
going to make you retain water to some degree. So
things are a little different now because we didn't have the anti-estrogens back then that we do today. We didn't have the Arimidex, the Aromacin, and stuff like that. We didn't know how to manipulate water quite the same way. But yeah, I still do the same old school thing as the contest comes closer. We add in the Primo and the Master on the Winstrol, and we pull out the long acting gear, the EQ, and the whatever else, the tests. So I still follow the old school. And I think it still works better.
Yeah, it's good.
So we've covered quite a lot, and I'm sure I could keep talking to you for weeks.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to be on again, but it's we're celebrating. Me and my wife are celebrating our anniversary tonight, so we got a big dinner date. That's why I'm wearing the nice shirt.
So, any advice you have that you want to give to new people coming up that want to succeed in the sport, or maybe just do better? What would your advice be?
Well, number one, completely stay away from all recreational drugs, opiates, Nubain, Oxycontin, Vicodin, and all recreational drugs and alcohol. Stay away from that completely. It's not going to help your competitive career at all. It's going to hinder it. So stay away from it. You make sacrifices in not eating candy and crap food, so just stay away from that as well. And what we talked about before, as far as once you put on a certain amount of size, and I guess I'm talking to like the national level guys and the pro guys, once you put on a certain amount of muscle mass, don't continue to just up your dose and up your dose and up your dose, because that's kind of what I did. I kind of just kept on going higher, and you kind of have to find a sweet spot for, because your receptor site can only hold so much, and you got to figure that out yourself. So I guess that's the best advice I can give right now.
I 100% agree with you. I'm 58 right now, and I'm still training my ass off, but I take the very, very minimal. I take 200 to 300 milligrams of test and 200 milligrams of NPP, and with that, I'm able to train as hard as I want to. Now I'm not trying to compete anymore. I'm not trying to be 250 pounds, but that's enough for me to train as hard as I want. And blood work is pretty decent. And I've been doing this 40 plus years. And even at my biggest, when I was 250, I I, I was pushing a gram a week at my all time biggest in size and strength. And I had taken more than that before, but I just I didn't see more from it.
Yeah.
I think there is that point of diminishing returns, and I think we all realize that.
Yeah.
But it's good to hear from you know, you were at the elite level, so you're hearing it straight from this is the real truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and again, like, would love to have you back. I'm sure we could talk for days. I know you got a dinner to get to.
Yep.
So we'll let you get to that. If people want to contact you or want to promote anything, where can they do that?
The best way they can contact me is through my Instagram. It's at IFBB Mike Morris. And I am holding a contest because I'm trying to grow my followers. So anybody that goes to my Instagram, if they follow and leave a comment, I'm going to pick a winner, and they're going to win a half-hour phone consultation with me. So go to my Instagram and follow and leave a comment, and maybe you'll be the winner. So
That's definitely worthwhile. I would sign up for that, because I mean that's golden right there.
yeah.
So say that Instagram one more time.
Instagram is at IFBB Mike Morris. Instagram. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And
You froze. Thanks for having me on, Larry. Hopefully I'll get on again sometime. Thank you.
a coming call.